About an hour outside of Belgrade, there's this beautiful little town called Topola that is steeped in history. This is the history of the First Serbian Uprising. I've been super fascinated to learn a lot about it, and so I'm really excited that we're here today, and I'm hoping we'll learn a whole bunch more. Right behind me here is a monument to Karađorđe Petrović, and he's the major leader of the First Serbian Uprising. The two Serbian uprisings are referring to events that happened against the Ottoman Empire when they were here, like early 1800s. And my understanding is the First Serbian Uprising was like the big military uprising that started right here in this area, and the Serbs were able to take like big regions of Serbia back from the Ottoman Empire before, in the end, the big army getting sent over, and then the rebellion was crushed. And then the Second Serbian Uprising was much more political. While there were like skirmishes and things like that, my understanding is it was kind of like political agreements where the Ottoman Empire had crumbled just enough that the Serbs were able to get some autonomy. This little town is super pretty, and so I'm excited. We're right here behind me. There is the church to Karajorjeva, and then over there is Karajorjeva Konak, like the home of the Karajorja family. Let's go check them out and see what it's all about. This town is super cute with its red tiled roofs and rolling hills. There's a bunch of like stonework streets. It's really beautiful, and I wish I had more time to spend there. But I was just kind of blowing through seeing the sights, so let's go check it out. This is the church that's built here on this ground. And the story of the First Serbian Uprising is that Karađorđe Petrović was born a peasant, but he had all of this unrest, obviously, growing up under the Ottoman Empire. And so he gathered together this militia and actually militarily won a whole bunch of land around here back from the Ottoman Empire. When they did, they built a fortress here. And so this was like the capital of that era for like a year or two. So somewhere around 1812, this church is built, and it's beautiful inside. It's like small and quaint, and you can tell it was built for function over form. Like, it's not a modern, huge, beautiful church. But I love the white walls and the simple icons, and the wooden iconostasis in the front of the church is gorgeous. It's incredible. So in 1812, when this is built, there's an original iconostasis, but in 1813, the Ottomans came and reconquered this area, and obviously the church and the iconostasis, everything is burned and destroyed. In that era, Karađorđe Petrović flees Serbia, and he runs to, I think first the Austro-Hungarians, but eventually ends up staying with the Russians for a few years. During the time when he's staying with the Russians, the Second Serbian Uprising happens, and so this is a different guy. King Milan actually raises up like a political movement, basically. I think there were some skirmishes, but they actually gain autonomy for Serbia under the Ottoman Empire. So they're kind of like an autonomous region during that period. And after King Milan, the next king was Karađorđe Petrović's son, Alexander. So Alexander actually rebuilt this iconostasis. My understanding is that that iconostasis was then sent to another town, and this one was actually put up in the 1920s. You can see the dragons at the very top, and there's a cool story. The other stories that I noticed carved into here are all like Old Testament and New Testament stories, and they're beautiful. It's wonderful. I love that you can see back behind the iconostasis into these old painted icons also. So the dragons come from the story of the Georgian dragon, and George and the Dragon is actually like a really old Christian story. It like predates the Crusades. So we're talking maybe like 3rd or 4th century. But in modern day Serbia, George, like Karajorja, is Black George, and so he's known as like George and the Dragon, and the dragon represents the Ottoman Empire. So it's an important story that in modern day Serbia is remembered as like the slayer of the Ottoman Empire that brought in an era of freedom for Serbia. And you'll see this theme in a lot of places that we go in this town. I love that there's these old legit church relics. I wish there was more description talking about like what purpose they serve and what they are, but maybe it's obvious to someone who's Orthodox and I just don't know. When you enter the church, to the right, there's this tomb in the wall that was the original tomb of Karađorđe Petrović. The last place we go in this town today is going to be the modern crypt of the Karajorja family. And this crypt is so gorgeous. So you gotta hang on. So you can see these mosaics and the beautiful light in this crypt. It's rad. I love this tradition in the Orthodox Church that outside of most of the churches, sometimes inside or in a cave, there's a little place where you can light candles. So of course you can donate money to the church, but you can also just buy a few candles and you come out and you light them and say prayers for the people who are close to you. It's a super cool tradition and a nice way to give to the church. The really incredible thing to me is the woodwork in the iconostasis. Wow, so beautiful and so unique. It's very uncommon that I've seen dragons like that in church. There's one of the monasteries on Fruška Gora does have like Georgian dragon painted. Super fascinating. Well, next let's go check out the Karajorja house right here next to the church. It looks beautiful. So in this era under the First Serbian Uprising, this was meant to be the Karađorđe Palace, and it's not very palacey, but it is a very beautiful house. Outside there's this really cool like rusted out long gun. I don't know enough to know if this is like a howitzer or what, but it's really cool, and I've rarely seen one that's open like this so you can see all the mechanisms and machinery behind it. So when you enter the house, the first thing you're confronted with is the bust of Karađorđe Petrović, and next to it there's this little cannon that's very cool. It was actually used for signaling, not war, and you can see one of the handles has been removed. It was his son Alexander removed this handle, and he had it melted down and built into his crown. The next thing is this big kind of meeting atrium. I assume if there was like dignitaries or people who visited, this would be like the first place you'd take them. And it is really, really pretty. Like I was saying, it's not like super grandiose like a palace, but it's definitely a really gorgeous space. So the next room you enter is like an ethnographic museum, and it's really neat. So I think this wooden thing on the left is like a storage container, but then of course we have like a millstone and an early chair. It's really fun to see stuff like this, and a couple of these pieces are really mind-blowing in craftsmanship. I love the way this cabinet is built to go like push back into the corner, and the low table, you can tell like maybe it was a dirt floor. This little like tankard or whatever, like water container, just beautiful woodwork. They have this model home underneath these icons that's really cool. And so you can see how it was like louvered in the very top to let the smoke out from the fire. And then inside you can see a little model of the way it might have been with like the cook fire in the middle of the home. Of course, like a little sleeping area and a little sitting area. Some traditional dress, and notice like the relatively straight sword. So in the art that we see, you'll notice like the curved swords versus the straight swords are of course the curved swords are the Ottomans. The Janissaries were famous for that. So a bunch of like housewares and things that would be used around the home. It's just really cool to see the way that things were constructed. But to me, the highlight of it all is this. So I don't know if this would have been like a water canteen or if it's meant to carry your rakia or whatever, but it's just such cool craftsmanship. Crazy to think of building stuff like this with your hands. So this painting seems to be, to me, like the very end of the Serbian uprising in 1813 when the Ottomans come back. This dude has like a super curved sword. Just a really interesting painting. I don't know how the birch logs are up in the sky, what that represents, but clearly it's wartime with lots of fire on the horizon, and someone has been executed at his feet. It's interesting because Karađorđe Petrović actually fled the nation, so he wasn't killed at the end of the First Serbian Uprising. This is a painting of his assassination. So after Karađorđe Petrović returned to Serbia, he was assassinated. These on the wall are very clearly like slave shackles. It's interesting, I didn't realize there was slavery like this in this area. But of course, none of these empires were particularly great to the people who weren't like the ruling class. So it makes sense there was slavery here under the Ottomans. I just never realized it before. And the rest of this art is depicting the First Serbian Uprising. There's some weaponry and tools that the soldiers would have used, or I guess really the militia, the Serbian militia. Here's Karađorđe Petrović himself, along with his weapons that he used in the uprising. Always astounding to me how big these long rifles are. I know they used to call them long rifles, but we don't realize they're like as tall as a short person. Then alongside this painting, this is the flag of the First Serbian Uprising, and it's fascinating to me that any of these survived. Like, after the Ottomans came back, I'm sure there was a concerted effort to destroy all of this propaganda. As I head up the hill to the Royal Crypt, I should point out I wore this sweatshirt very specifically today because it seemed appropriate. It has two kind of Serbian national slogans on them. They feel very much tied to the spirit of the Serbian uprisings. So, as of here, Sverom u Bogu, it's Sverom u Boga, with faith in God, and Sloboda ili smrt, freedom or death. It's really, there are so many things that I think we feel are the American spirit that are so much more alive here. Truly a fantastic place, fantastic country, full of really, really amazing people. All right, let's head up the hill to the Royal Crypt. It also is worth pointing out, during the First Serbian Uprising, this place where I'm standing right here is where the capital of the freed country of Serbia was built. And so this was like a fortress. And so part of the reason of like the church towers and things like that were actually to communicate to people in the countryside about what's going on and safety and should you come into the fortress and stuff like that. Super interesting. So walking up to the modern church and the crypt, you go through this really beautiful park area. And I bet in a couple weeks when the leaves are changing, this is gorgeous. And being labeled Alexander makes it look like it was Karađorđe Petrović's son, but I would have thought he'd be down in the crypt, so I'm willing to bet this tomb is empty. All right, next up here in Topola, we have the Church of the Holy Martyr George. Of course, Karađorđe Petrović was known as Black George, so I assume he is the Holy Martyr George, which makes a ton of sense given the history of this place. The church is supposed to be super gorgeous, so I'm excited to go check it out. But the real gem of this city is supposed to be the Royal Crypt, so I'm excited to find out. I don't know if it's inside the church or if we're gonna have to go looking afterwards. Well, let's go find out. This church is beautiful, like a lot of these really big, beautiful, modern Serbian churches. Right here on the facade, you see Georgian Dragon again, which makes total sense. It's kind of like the icon of this area. I always think it's interesting that some of the churches here have tied together like symbols of state and the church. So you see the double-headed eagles when you enter, but it makes sense. It's like a royal church, you know? This church is gorgeous, so many pretty modern icons. I love Christ the Pantocrator in the main cupola, but it's cool. The other cupolas also have different representations of God. So the one like behind the iconostasis in the front has God the Father, and then on the sides you actually have, I think it's a representation of the Holy Spirit, and then of Mother Mary. It's very ornate and beautiful. It's a really cool place. But the real key to this church is the crypt. You can't see in a lot of these photos, but all of this is mosaicked. And the mosaics are incredibly beautiful, but when you head down into the crypt, like the color schemes change and they get so pretty. You can kind of see the beginning of the color schemes changing here. It's kind of more like earthy and burnt. I absolutely love it. And then on the ceiling, you have these mosaics of like night sky and beautiful geometry. I love the juxtaposition of colors and the stories that are within the arches. Of course, a lot of these stories are more stories of like statehood and the fight for freedom, and not as much the stories of the Bible, which makes sense being a royal crypt. This is one of those places where none of this does it any justice. It is so beautiful.
And the time of day I was there, these wings on the side have incredible light coming through. Again, in the center, we have Christ the Pantocreator. I love the light coming through the window here, and then combined with the gold and the blue and all of the pretty mosaic tiles. Such an incredible place.
Wow, that was absolutely incredible. Those mosaics are fantastic. Obviously the history is fascinating as well. Really, really cool. Beautiful, beautiful place. Topola is well worth a visit. There's also the King's Vineyards nearby, which is included in the same ticket. It's not really my jam, so I'm not gonna head over there, but I bet a lot of you guys might. Of course, if it were the King's Craft Brewery, you know I'd be all about that. But if you're gonna be in Belgrade and you won't have the chance to make the trip an hour outside over here to Topola, then there are some churches in Belgrade, at least one of which I personally think is even prettier than this one. I have to admit, the crypt in the church in Belgrade is incredible, but I think this one's gotta top it. So if you're interested in checking out a few incredibly gorgeous churches right in Belgrade, then check out the video right here.